Let me try to explain the concept. And basically, it's that I think the scriptures clearly indicate that that the church is a spiritual body, and we know that a spiritual body cannot own assets. And so the way that brethren have gotten around that, or the way Christians have gotten around it over the ages, is by forming a corporation and letting the corporation own assets, and let the corporation then receive gifts, money, payments, I guess you'd say, contributions, and then the religious corporation manages those contributions and promotes the gospel through as if it were an economic enterprise rather than being a spiritual body. And so the gospel is supposed to be spread by amateurs who are not paid. They can be supported but not paid as servants. They're not hired. They're merely people that work for the Lord, and other brethren can support them in their ministry and provide them hospitality and what they need in the way of living resources, but they do not become an employee of the brethren. But the brethren can own homes, or they can own a building, they can own a warehouse, they can own anything they wanted to in order to do the work of the Lord. In fact, the scriptures say, "Be ready unto every good work." So you can own anything that permits you to do good work. You can own a kitchen to cook in. You can own a home to live in. You can own a building for needy people to stay in. You can own a building for people to assemble in. But you can't, you're not authorized to have the church own something as a spiritual body. And so the solution would seem to be, for example, there's a church building available that used to belong to the Methodist Church in Nashville that could be purchased, and it could be purchased as an LLC, just as you would purchase any real estate. And then all of the brethren, or a few of the brethren, could loan the money to pay for it and charge interest, but preferably not charge interest. Just let the interest be their gift to the brethren, to the congregation. And so here you would have a building owned by an LLC and money loaned to that LLC by the brethren, and it's still their money. They can ask for it back at any time, so you would just put the LLC on a line of credit with the bank. And so if somebody loans $10,000 and they need the money, or they want to move out of town or whatever, then they just get a check for that $10,000. In the meanwhile, the church assembles there and uses it as a building to operate out of, but they don't try to make a spiritual body into a religious corporation, and they don't give the church another name. All it is, anybody who is born again becomes a part of the spiritual body of Christ. They don't need anything beyond that. They don't become part of the spiritual body of Christ plus a Baptist, plus Church of Christ, plus Catholic, plus the Methodist. You don't need a plus to go with it. And so it would just be the Church of Nashville, the body of Christ in Nashville, and you would have one leadership over all of the saints in Nashville. And part of them might look out for Madison, part for Antioch, part for downtown, part for East Nashville, but they would be capable of meeting together themselves and helping to oversee the spiritual affairs of the church for the city of Nashville, just as you would Antioch, or in the New Testament, Ephesus, Antioch, Jerusalem, or whatever. And they're not managing assets. What they're doing is providing making sure that there's adequate teaching, and so that everybody in Nashville gets to hear the gospel and have an opportunity to become a part of Christ's spiritual body, but not getting wrapped up in any kind of corporate structure in the process. And so in Belle Meade, you might have nicer buildings owned by the brethren than in Antioch, but it'd still be the same spiritual body. And wherever there were needy saints, then people could take up a collection and not have Christians going hungry anywhere when other people have more than they need. And so you would have an LLC with a mortgage and somebody responsible for it. In this case, the building I'm thinking about, I would be responsible for, and I would loan the most of the money at no interest, and other people could loan smaller amounts in the same way or not loan any, whatever they chose. But the church would operate out of that building, would assemble there, and it could have good works taking place by the brethren out in the community, but assembling and singing and worshiping together and encouraging one another unto good works. And particularly the spreading of the gospel. The main purpose of the church would be to get the message out of the need for people to be saved. And so you'd send, probably instead of having big, long worship services, you'd maybe meet for a little while and go out 2 by 2 into the neighborhoods and knock on doors and just ask people if they would like to hear the message of Christ. And so it loses a lot of its complexity, and it becomes a much simpler process. But it also means that the billions of dollars of wealth that already exist would have to be dealt with, and that people would have to begin to be willing to give to the Lord without asking the government to subsidize it. It's really paradoxical that God, who gives life and breath to all things and who owns the whole world, that he needs the United States government, which is $20 trillion in debt, to subsidize his work. So I don't know how people can expect to be blessed if they don't have faith enough to believe in God's grace rather than in the government's contribution.